Good morning. Welcome to another chapter, another episode of our reading through the Bible. We do one chapter every Wednesday morning for 30 minutes to an hour, and we have been reading through the book of the Psalms, and today we are reading Psalm 19. Mike, so I didn't sneeze in your face. I'm Pastor Lou Kilgore. I'm pastor here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church, where we are continuing our ministries in a variety of settings. And instead of just being able to provide studies and readings, looking for encouragement in the Bible in person, we are continuing this method of presenting reading and reflection or thoughts about the Bible live on YouTube. And so I'm happy if you're joining us live, welcome. If you're listening in later, we are broadcasting here at 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, our rock, our redeemer, our companion, our shepherd, we are often so caught up in the things we can touch and see that we forget that a lot of your presence with us is in ways that cannot be touched, that cannot be heard in the normal sense. So we pray your Spirit to enlighten us, to empower us, help us to hear what otherwise we couldn't hear, help us to see what otherwise we might not be able to see. And in so, seeing and hearing, that we will be strengthened in our trust in you and in our faith in life itself. In Jesus' precious name, amen. All right. So I've been trying to simplify a little bit of what I'm doing. I used to read from the regular translation, the ones that smoothed out for you. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but a lot of the commercial Bibles, the King James, the RSV, are smoothed out translations for the purpose of helping to hear them and read them better. The translation that I'm reading from is actually more tied directly to the original language, the Hebrew. And so it's not always the same, but you can follow along. It's not that different. Today we're reading Psalm 19. And throughout the history of the church and throughout the history of Jewish gatherings, this psalm is one of the favorites. You might know the 23rd Psalm, and you might know some others that have gained popularity. Inside the religious circles, this psalm is considered by people of faith to be one of the most profound in the way it uses a metaphor and it uses the experience of life and everything that goes on around us to point to God. So without saying anything more before I read, I'm going to read it and encourage you to just listen to the beauty of the witness of this psalm. The heavens are recounting God's glory, and the firmament is declaring the work of God's hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night makes known knowledge. There is no speech, and there are no words. Their voice is inaudible. Their voice has gone forth into all the earth, and their words to the extremities of the world. For the sun, he pitched a tent in them. So it is like a bridegroom going forth from his chamber. It rejoices like a warrior to run his course. From the extremity of the heavens it is going forth, and its circuit is to their extremities, and there is none hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the life. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are upright, making the heart rejoice. And the commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is radiant, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are entirely righteous, more desirable than gold and more desirable than much pure gold, and sweeter than honey, even honey right from the honeycombs. Moreover, your servant is illumined by them. In observing them is great reward. Who can discern errors? Acquit me of hidden sins. Withhold your servant even from presumptuous persons, and let them not rule over me. Then I shall be whole, and I shall be acquitted from great transgression. May the words of my mouth find favor, and may the meditations of my heart be according to your will. O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer. Now, I'm sure that as I was reading that, there are echoes, right, of very familiar and often used passages of quoting from Scripture. You might not have known where they came from. A lot of them come right here from Psalm 19, especially the words at the end, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable according to your will, O God, my rock and my Redeemer. Congregations throughout the ages have used those words to close their gatherings for faith. It's a benediction that we use often. We're familiar with it in that way. Now, I want to start in the first movement of the psalm. The very first part of the psalm is the praise of God in nature. Now, the commentator makes a big deal of this, and I think it is important that it's not unusual for nature to be lifted up to illustrate the presence of God and even sort of the urgings of God. What does God want from us? You can look around in nature and you can see it. But I just want to say this right up front. One of the unique elements of Hebrew theology illustrated here in the Psalm is there were a lot of other religions contemporary with the Hebrew faith. In those faiths, nature is God. The sun is God, the moon, and they are gods. They don't just report for God, they are God. But in the Hebrew theology, the presence of nature, of the sky and of the stars and of the sun and the moon, they make an awareness of God. They are the handmaid, if you will, of God. They are not God. And it's an important distinction that the world of nature testifies by its very existence to God. But that is not God. The heavens or the sky are associated with aspects of light and darkness. You can hear it in all of this as it unfolds. But the hymn, the psalm that we've heard, does not say that you can look to the stars and you can see God, or that you can see God in nature. You can't see God in nature. You can hear a proclamation about God in nature. To me, it's an interesting distinction. It's why Christians and Jews are not pantheists. The trees and the earth are not God. They point to God. Now, in the second part, verses 4 and 5, it says a really interesting thing. I often find myself quoting this as a gathering for faith begins. That day and night, all around us pours forth speech. There are words that direct us to God, that encourage us about God's presence with us, and they're all around us. But then the psalmist goes on to say, there is no speech that you can hear. This is not an audible. This is not an audible. The mountains are telling the glory of God, but it's not asking you to stop and listen to what the words are that the mountains are telling us. He makes this paradox of this word, an inaudible noise. There is no speech, no noise from a literal or acoustic perspective. On the other hand, there is a voice that penetrates to the furthest corners of the earth, to the absolute ends of the earth and beyond. And nature is personified. He looks up at the sun and he sees the incredible strength and power of the sun to make its course across the sky every day. And he sees how the presence of the sun warms the entire planet. It warms everything. And in that same way, he sees a metaphor for God. The sun is not God. The Egyptians and the Romans, they made the sun to be God, but it's not that way. Nature is personified, it is not deified. And then there's a shift in verse 8. There's a second reflection on the whole power and the presence of God's law, of the rules of God, of life, and reviving the life, making wise the simple, making the heart rejoice, enlightening the eyes. It reveals the dimensions of truth and reality in human existence, for it is given by God, the giver of life. This description of the bountiful nature of God's Torah is presented in carefully balanced poetry, but the deeper force of the language may emerge from the imagery and allusions underlying the languages. The initial praise of God in nature and law evokes in the psalmist a sudden awareness of unworthiness. So the writer has done a sort of tour of nature and of all the elements, the most grandeur of that, and allowed those things to speak of God's presence in our lives, but to speak in words unhearable. And in the same way, he then moves on to reflect on what is a strange combination, the joy of the law. Law being the orderliness of life, and how life is enhanced and it's made so much better. Joy and fullness of life come through following the precepts of God. Now, I mean, to me, what's been happening to me in the rereading and reading again of the historical narratives of the Hebrew texts is that the law of God is not. It's not the requirements for sacrificial, 2 lambs for this sin, or it's not those rules. That's not the law. The law of the Lord, which is perfect, finds its meaning embedded in the commission to Abram and Sarah. I will be your God, you will be my people, and together we will walk together on this earth, and you will be a blessing to the families of the earth. It seems to me that what we've missed in this concept of law, of Torah, is that behind the Torah, the laws in small l, is the law. Yeah, I think this is what Jesus dusts off when the Pharisee asks him, what is the greatest commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the law of God. It's not, come to church every Sunday and give money and all. It's love. It's love. The law of God is love. And what the psalmist is reflecting on is that love is not just something that is a good thing to do. It's living in love and living to be a blessing to the families of the earth releases us to have the life that God created for us. It's not seen by the psalmist as an obligation. It's discovered by the psalmist as a way of freedom, of setting us free to discover life and to discover meaning and purpose. It's like the sun. It's like the sun. Listen to this. There is none hidden from the sun's heat. The clause makes a transition between the two parts of the psalm. At the same time, it links them intimately together. Just as the sun dominates the daytime sky, so too does the law dominate human life. As the sun can be both welcome in giving warmth and terrifying in its unrelenting heat, so too the Torah can be both life imparting, but also scorching, testing, and purifying. Neither are indispensable. There could be no life on this planet without the sun. And there can be no true human life without the revealed word, the encouragement, the beckoning of God in the Torah. I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read the psalm again from beginning to end. I've moved through it fairly quickly in terms of interpretation. It's so beautiful, it needs very little in edifying comments. Psalm 19, 15 verses. The heavens are recounting God's glory, and the firmament is declaring the work of God's hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night makes known knowledge. There is no speech and there are no words. Their voice is inaudible. Their voice has gone forth into all the earth, and their words to the extremity of the world. For the sun, he pitched a tent in them. So it is like a bridegroom going forth from his chamber. It rejoices like a warrior to run his course. From the extremities of the heaven going forth, and its circuit is to their extremities, and there is none hidden from its heat. That's the sun. The law of the Lord is perfect. Now this is a jump. Like the sun. The words that are pouring forth are the law. It's the Torah. It's the nudging. It's the movement of God to live life right, to live life in the way that produces life. The law of the Lord is perfect. It revives life. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are upright, making the heart rejoice. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord, and this word, the fear of the Lord, I always feel like I need to take it on a little bit. The word fear is based in the word awe. Standing in awe of God, standing back in a kind of wow, like that's the awness, the awesomeness of God, and that's the fear of the Lord is radiant, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, they are entirely righteous. More desirable than gold, and much more than pure gold, and sweeter than honey, even honey from the honeycombs. So again, the psalmist is trying to get across the point that everything that glitters is not gold. There is a redirection in all of nature, which points us to this precept of God. And I think sometimes they were so aware in their minds of what the law of God was that when it's not renamed here, we don't know what it is. What is the law of God? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. You shall be a blessing to the families of the earth. These are the major nudges, the beckoning of God in our lives to find full life, figuring out how to be a blessing on this earth. It's the opposite of selfishness. It's the opposite of self-centeredness. That's what the Torah invites us to. It invites us to an emptying of ourselves, and everything in creation, everything, the sun, the moon, the stars, especially in the broad sense of the firmament, the Psalter is saying, is where that beckoning is coming from. Follow me. Moreover, your servant is illuminated by these. In observing them is great reward. Who can discern errors? Acquit me from hidden sins. Without your servant, even from presumptuous persons. Withhold and let them not rule over me. So in the journey of trying to make this reflection and this awareness of the excitement, of the simplicity and the directness of God's encouragement to our lives, the Psalter wonders, have I followed them? I know that I have not. And so he begins to do a kind of a confession of his own life. Then I shall be whole, and I shall be acquitted from great transgression. Keep me away from presumptuous people who pretend that somehow these laws, this sense that, pursuing money and power and fame and glory, they will not lead you to life. They will not. They just will not. So keep me away from people who believe that, because I've been affected by them enough. Then I shall be whole, and I shall be acquitted from great transgression. May the words of my mouth find favor, and may the meditations of my heart be according to your will, O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer. Well, that's Psalm 19, 1 to 15, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you here today. Again, my name is Pastor Lou Kilgore, and I'm glad you were able to partake. I'm glad you were able to listen in and join in. I hope that the reflections about God's invitation to you in how to find the fullness of life and to listen for it all around you. It's everywhere, permeating the environment above and around and in us. May God bless you today. May the meditations of your heart and of your mind be acceptable in God's sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. God bless you, my friends. I'll see you next week.